Welcome back to the Alphabet of Healing, in which we reached its letter Q. In this reflection, Q stands for quilting. I'm Julia, one of the sisters here in the Bay Area of the Verbum Dei Missionary Fraternity. I directly would like to say I'm not a quilter, but an admirer of quilting. I'm also not the first person to connect healing with quilting, since the important and famous AIDS memorial quilt or at art of recovery programs for cancer patients and their families and friends producing quilts for or in memory of loved ones. For my own short reflections, I'm only taking a couple of aspects that made me ponder our personal and social healing journeys. I have been so moved by the vulnerability of a quilt. What holds the sometimes colossal, amazing beauty of the quilt together are the holes the needles made, the fine thread woven through it. Often, when it is a patchwork quilt, old and newer cloths are delicately sturdied with each other so they don't rip at the seam. I'm wondering about our own society and relationship. So often we want to build community by our strengths, but truly it is our vulnerability that let us be stitched together as a whole. The delicate thread of compassion and empathy sturdies us between the different textures of materials. There is an affinity between people who share the same illness, independent of age, race, or culture. They are the threads of body knowledge that sew us together, a knowledge not well, don't want to say no one, but nearly no one else really understands. That perhaps is also one reason why the kinship Jesus asked from his disciple was so tight-knit, nearly secretive to others. The ones who knew him had experiences that others simply could not fully comprehend. Even the resurrection was the experience of the disciples, and then became through them an experience of others. Another aspect of quilt making are the layers that are involved. At all times, all three layers need to be involved in the sometimes incredibly intricate patterns of the quilt. Quilting as a verb means literally stitching together the three layers. Perhaps that is one of the reasons why it is so popular in the use of important transitions or celebrations of life, or precisely in memorial quilt as mentioned earlier. The layers of our life as history is made up from the past, the present, and the future. Every day we live, every breath we take, we are part of that very history, and we are continuing to create it by being part of it. Quilting means stitching our history together, not to glue it, but whole by whole, movement by movement, a delicate thread is creating what we one day admire as a whole, where everything is integrated. I'm wondering who are the quilters in our societies who can do this, who are not afraid of leading the thread of compassion and empathy through the holes of our lives, to bring memory and future together around the thick and fluffy present, so full of possibility. I'm again reminded of Jesus, who never wanted to abolish his Jewishness or Jewish law. The memory as a Jew was as sacred to him as was the life in a shifting and evolving Galilee under Roman rule around the year 0, to which he responded with the help of his memory, his Jewish memory, to make a liberating future for people possible. Perhaps the last aspect I want to mention is the cultural importance of quilting. Quilting originated in Europe and was much connected with being a luxury item, produced for the wealthy and to the royalty. In contrast to the romanticizing idea of a leisure quilting at the fireplace of the new immigrants to the USA, it was rather combined with the need to make ends meet and with a seldom social celebration of a quilting bee as a place of social encounter and conversation in change for once of the hard daily labor. Old quilts were held in great prestige because they were part of home, that still were holding us warm in this new country. When I came across Native American quilts, I was surprised, since they did not use the same imagery in the quilts, but used the same craftsmanship. So a craft that was coming from the ones that took away the land of the Native Americans now is used by Native Americans, but in a very liberating way. It's like a post-colonial reading of something that an oppressor has given you. You read it against the grain. The quilts in the Native American community, especially by the Lakota, but not only by them, had become their own art. They would actually show fights and wars, death and killing from their perspective. The quilted blankets took the role of a buffalo robe, which were worn for warmth and also for important ceremonies. With the slaughtering of the buffalo by the immigrants, some of the nomad tribes began using quilting to continue their artistic expression in the robes, for newborn, for newly-wed ones, for coming of age, or other important moments of transition and celebrations in life. These quilts would be quilted. While quilting was probably utilitarian in nature for both groups, the immigrant and the Native American, it was more a social event in the immigrant community, and it was more used for events of social importance in the Native American community. The quilt making in the Native American community was filled with religious thought and prayer, mostly done in contemplative silence. On a quilt in which Susan Hudson, Navajo, Dini honors missing and murdered indigenous women since 1492. That's the title she chose for her quilt. She hand-stitched on the quilt a quote honoring Gina Glambuzzi, a Lakota rosewood sioux. That quote, I think, can be a description of why the image of quilting might have something to do with learning a journey of healing, even though we might never physically actually do any craft. It says, their story does not end with them. Their story is just the beginning. Their story keeps me going. Their story gives us strength and hope. Let's remember our womb in joining the past, present, and future for the healing of generations. I have been wondering how many different ways there might be to be quilting a national quilt after 2020, joining the past, present, and future for the healing of generations, creating a new fabric for ourselves and the country. As I said before, I'm not a quilter, but I learn from them what stitching together might mean, how to use traditional symbols and connect our emotions with them, how not to let go of what sustains us, and that can always give us new life. Not only to be a victim of history and illness, but also someone who supports healing it. I will end with what Scherer Bonaparte, Avivasni, taught me. When there was internal turmoil on the reservation, she said, 2 people were left dead by gunfire. She needed to bring her experience onto the quilt. She was stitching at that very moment. And she was stitching a traditional tree of peace, a central religious symbol for the reservation. However, under it, that tree of peace, she stitched 2 war clubs and an AK-47, because she wanted to make memory of those 2 people dead of senseless violence under the tree of peace. But while doing that stitching, she said, I was so nervous because it was sacrilegious to mess with a traditional symbol. My heart raced while I stitched. To calm down, I stitched in the three sisters: corn, bean, and squash. They are the sustainer of life for our people. Quilting like this was a healing process. Quilting like this, joining what we feel together with the traditional symbols, giving them new life because of the experiences that we cannot deny, creating a future because the memory is buried at the foot of the tree of peace, or as Christians would say, at the foot of the cross. Quilting like that is a healing process.